The DIESOL podcast.
Digital integration in English as a second or other language.
Interview with Dr. Mary Patton.
Hello and welcome to DIESOL. We are your hosts. I am Brent Warner.
And I'm Ixchell Reyes. And today we have a special guest. This is Dr. Mary Patton. Hey, Mary.
Hey.
And Dr. Mary Patton is actually one of our former colleagues. We used to work together at USC.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where our connection is. But she is faculty at El Centro Community College in Dallas, Texas, of course. And she is a current president of TEXTESOL V.
Yeah. So, Mary, we've been wanting to talk to you since we decided to start taking on having guests on the show. And we're glad we finally made the time work out. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And today we are going to be talking about mostly about culturally responsive teaching, right?
Yeah.
So can you share a little bit about your background in this area and why it's important to you, and kind of how you got started and what you think? We're just going to go over everything. I mean, it's an open conversation, but let's get the ground running with it first.
Sure. Well, when I moved to Dallas and started working at the community college, it was kind of different than anything I've ever done before, where the emphasis was different than what it was at USC, where we were really preparing them for like graduate level work. And so I was starting to do things that I had done before, but my dean had kind of not pressured me, but he had talked with me and suggested that we work on more critical thinking skills because our students, I teach the highest level at our ESOL classes right before they matriculate into the college. And we're told numerous times that they weren't performing at the highest level once they got into the college. So he had asked to try to do more critical thinking. He's very liberal arts oriented. So he had encouraged us to do that. And when we first started, I was teaching a low level, a middle level, and a high level. And we were using just the materials that the instructors had used before us, because that's kind of what happens when you start a new class. So for instance, in a reading class, they were using the book, The Hatchet, which is a fine book and it's a good story, but it's not something really that your average ESOL student can relate to.
I already know where this story is going.
Flying through the mountains in Canada and you're crashing and you have to survive in the wilderness.
Wait, you mean not all of our students have that experience?
Yeah, no, not at all. So they were so bored by it, and I was trying to liven it up. And it was one of those classes where after every class, I would be thinking, what am I doing wrong? Where you're reflecting so much on it. Is it them? Is it me? What is happening here? So I talked with my coordinator and the other full-time faculty that we have, and we decided that it was probably more the materials than anything else that was happening. So we went and we actually spent the summer reading up on all of these different cultural books. So I had followed at the time on Twitter Project Lit, and they had come out with, I think it was like 2018, they had come out with the top young adult cultural novels to read. And so we had spent the summer reading up on all these different novels, like The 57 Bus and One Way, The Long Way Down, and All American Boys, and all these different novels of things that were starting to become more popular for young adult, but had never been put into ESOL classes yet. So it was starting the time where Black Lives Matter was becoming more than Black Lives Matter and getting into more of mainstream classrooms, and where K through 12 teachers were starting to use things like refugee and different books in the classroom that really related more to real life than the Hatchet. And I mean, I had even taught The Alchemist, which is a great book, but again, it's been taught for so long that there's not a ton of new things you can do with it. So we had decided to start integrating more of this, these culturally responsive, diverse, social, political issues into our classrooms. And that's really what started me on this little trip that I've been on, is reading all these novels and seeing what's been happening out in the community and in real life and in the news, and just trying to bring it into the classroom. And I have gotten some kind of pushback from
this is what I want to talk
not
about.
my students.
Teachers.
Yeah, my students enjoy the material, actually, and even with some of the vocabulary that can be a little difficult, they're able to follow. And my dean, with his liberal arts, everybody needs a liberal arts education, kind of enjoys what I'm doing. But I've gotten some pushback from other people who don't necessarily think that these types of materials and topics and books are things that ESOL students need.
Perfect.
That they're kind of too high for them.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to talk about this because I was interested in possibly bringing in The Hate U Give into one of my classes. And talking.
Oh, I teach that. Yes.
Yeah, and I know because I saw you talking about it on Twitter, and I'm like, I'm going to do that. And then I introduced it to some of our teachers, and some of the teachers were like, I don't know if it's appropriate, or like it. I mean, it deals with like, well, I guess it's pretty obvious early in the story. It's like the kid, gets shot by the police, right? And so, and then it's a black kid that gets shot by the police, and it's kind of this whole story, a really popular, very, very popular book, and all of these types of things. And I thought, wow, this would be a really interesting thing to bring into our class, because it talks about cultural issues that are happening in America, dynamics of minorities and police, and all those types of things. But then there were, there were people who just weren't comfortable talking about that type of stuff in the classroom, right? It's like, maybe for whatever different reasons, I don't, like maybe they just don't feel like it's their place to share that, or maybe they feel like it's not appropriate to be pushing some sort of agenda, I guess, maybe on students or whatever it is. So how have you started to deal with that?
So I try to go at it in the middle ground. So actually, I've taught that book twice in class before. And interestingly enough, I had a student from El Salvador or Guatemala, El Salvador, who told me this is the very first book she ever actually read in English, that before she would always go to like crib notes or something and just read the summary. But this book connected so much with her life that she actually read it, and in only a matter of weeks before we even had to. I kind of go for a neutral ground, because some students really like it and they have similar experiences to things in their country. We're not solo in the only country that has racial issues and class issues. So they are able to connect to it. I have had students who, most students are on the side of the teenagers in the book, and I try to play at the neutral ground. I enjoy being devil's advocate also and arguing for other sides. But I have had students who are totally against, that they think the police was right, and that, which you're allowed to think either side. It doesn't matter to me as long as you're talking about it. So I've had a student who was adamantly hated the book because he thought it was anti-police, and he was very much so on the side that the police officer did everything correct, and that, he's risking his life every day to do whatever he needed to do. So we talk about both sides of things. So it's not, I wouldn't say I'm to push an agenda. You're not pushing an agenda. You're pushing a discussion.
Right.
And just explaining, like, this is what's happening, what's happening on one side of things and what's happening on the other side of things. And I always come at it, I preface it with, some of these conversations are going to be kind of uncomfortable for everybody involved, because that's what happens when we are touching on topics that are important and that are happening in society And that's kind of how we learn and get outside of our comfort zone, is by not being super comfortable. And, you know, I'm white, so I have privilege in this, and I'm aware that I have privilege in this. And I say that I'm not, that doesn't mean it's right. And that doesn't mean it's best that this is what's happening, but currently this is a situation that happened. So no, I've never had to worry when a police officer pulls me over, where am I putting my hands? I've never had to have the talk, which they talk about in the Hate U Give. I've never had to think about that, but is that okay? You know, it's disheartening to know that part of our society doesn't even know what the talk is, and the other part has it when they're like 9 years old. Mm-hmm. So as long as you just go in up front and, you know, admit and say, you know, this might not be the life I've lived or the experiences I've had, but this is the experience of many people in the United States. And so let's talk about why it's happening and what's happening from the police point of view in this situation, and what's happening from the children's point of view, or the teenagers' point of view in the book on this side.
Yeah. So one of the things that I often deal with in having kind of a little bit more charged topics or whatever is my concern that the students are trying to answer what they think that I want to hear, rather than, rather than actually their real opinions. Right. So a lot of times they're kind of like sussing me out and going, oh, you know, he probably likes this idea and he probably likes that idea. And those tend to be the ones that are the least interesting, or the least developed, because they're not actually thinking through their process, but they're just kind of responding to me. So when you're dealing with something like this, you know, you said, okay, you're going to, hey, look at the police side and then look at the teenagers side and, you know, what's going on. How do you encourage students to kind of, embrace their opinions and embrace their thoughts on these kind of topical, difficult issues?
Well, we do lots of discussions, like individually, and then they share it if they feel comfortable sharing it. I also always do a discussion board. So our learning platform that we use is Blackboard, but I have them set up. We have a discussion set up, and I have some specific questions that I ask them relating to how they feel about things. Do you think this is right or wrong? What are your thoughts on this person, or why did that happen? Have you ever had an experience with this, or have you heard anything on the news, or seen anything in your life dealing with this, or how was this done where you grew up, or in any country you're aware of? So I do give them time outside of class to do it. Sometimes in class, they're caught up in whatever's happening, or they're too shy to kind of say it. But if you let them have time to think and have time to go through their answers solo at home, and then post it online later where they have had time to go through it and edit anything they want to, you usually get some really good responses out of it. And then actually the activity I do at the end of this novel is I have them pick one of the themes from the book, which tend to be related to social issues or political issues, but really any theme that comes up in the book. And then they are supposed to, write a paper about why they picked that theme, how it appears in the book, and how it has affected their life, or what experience they've had with that idea. And then they have to make a video online where they can use clips from like YouTube or something, or they can make their own videos using some different apps and stuff. But they have to make a video then where they explain, the theme, how it's seen in the novel, what the problem is with the theme, and then what a possible solution to the problem is. So they have a lot of kind of freedom in this. And I've gotten some really good videos, to the point where I spent probably an hour one time looking online trying to find this video, because I thought there's no possible way the student made this video. And it's too good. They had to have gotten it from somewhere. But no, they made it themselves. They showed me the app where they created it, and it was, we've gotten some work from them. I
had a student who was a basically a videographer and a motions graphics major back in his country, and then he ended up making a video. We did Farewell to Manzanar, and talking about the Japanese internment camps and all those types of things. And man, I mean, it was an amazing video. It was like, we played it for the class and everybody's jaws were just dropped, right? Like it was just unbelievable what people can come up with. So yeah, it's cool to see that too, because we never know like what some of our students are capable of until we give them the opportunity to explore and to share their special skills and talents.
The thing with The Hate U Give is it isn't a movie. So you do have to be aware that it's a movie, and students know it's a movie. But there are enough differences that if somebody's giving you answers from the movie, you'll be able to tell.
Right.
So.
I definitely had that. We taught spare parts too, and I don't know if you've read the book or seen the movie, but the book is incredibly different from the movie. They've really blended up characters, and they've kind of changed a lot of the storyline for the movie from the book. And so yeah, I had a couple of students who clearly just watched the movie and responded to that, and it was like, no,
right.
And so those are good things to always be aware of when you have a movie book combo. Is like, I usually end up trying to focus at least one of our papers on distinguishing the differences between the movie and the book, and then why it's important.
So Mary, with some of those neat responses that you've gotten from your students, how have you been able to influence other colleagues who were maybe skeptical at first? Have you had success in that area? Or are you the only one teaching these books?
No, actually, well, I'm the only one teaching The Hate U Give, because we're small. Well, we're a lot smaller now. So we really only have one class of the higher level. But my ESOL colleagues were on board. It was more colleagues online that might not have been so on board. But I have shared at different conferences what I've done, and it seems to get a really good response from people. And I also teach refugee in an intermediate class, and then an even lower class I teach Ask Me No Questions. So the thing we did is we wanted to make sure it wasn't all just social or race related, that some might be immigration topics, but we didn't want all of the things we're doing to be all immigration, throughout all the different levels that we have. But my colleagues are teaching similarly. So they have picked different books in their levels also. And what we did when we read, because we probably spent that summer, and I probably read like 30 different novels at least. And so did my colleague. And so we created a spreadsheet where we would go in Google and type in the book that we read and a brief synopsis of it and what it was talking about, what social issues maybe, and then compare it to what lexical level it would be, so that we could guess at what course it would be in, so that for future people coming in, for people like adjuncts who don't have time to be doing all of this type of research for it, or other full-timers, that they could go in and just look at this spreadsheet and see, okay, this is my level, I need this lexical level, here are the books, and look through and see what options that they have. And I did give a presentation at my college on this, and one of the English faculty is doing the 57 bus in their class now. So
and I know that I went to your presentation last year at TEXTESOL, the state conference in San Antonio, and I attended, and I got a lot of ideas. I was pretty impressed with the way that you introduce students to the topics, and the way that you integrate some of the tech out there for them to express themselves, and how that helps them to validate their voice. And I'm wondering that spreadsheet that you have, is that something that you could share with our listeners, or is there a version of it that we could?
Yeah, we could share that. There's no problem with that.
Because that sounds like a great resource, especially right now too.
Yeah, I think one of the big things is hard for people to find materials. So if people, if we're just talking about novels right now, there's more to it. And of course, we'll get into it in a few minutes, but just talking about novels, like you said, it's hard for people to find things, or, some people aren't heavy readers, and so they don't have tons of, like every time they're like, oh, this and this and this, There are some amazing teachers out there who do have the time to read all these different books and really have an understanding, but like you said, a lot of people don't. And so it would be, I'm always kind of on the lookout for like, okay, what more books would be interesting or viable at this level? And so I think that would be really valuable for a lot of people, that if we could share that in the show notes.
Yeah, I can send that. There's no problem. And
then we're also thinking here, Mary, about, excuse me, just 1 second. Sorry. Whoa, sorry, really caught my throat here. Give me just a second. Okay, I lost my position. What was I talking about? Okay. Okay. So let's jump back into it. So also, Mary, we're thinking about, having all of these resources as books and, and of course the other ideas too. But one thing I'm interested in is all of our communities maybe have a different demographic, right? And so maybe, in Texas, you might be working with more of, and again, I'm making an assumption here, but maybe you've got like a larger Hispanic community. In my particular case, we've got like a larger Chinese speaking and Farsi speaking community. And so what are your thoughts in terms of like trying to appeal directly to your communities versus like broader concepts that are like, how do you maintain cultural responsiveness as there are so many different possible cultures to be working with, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Right. We do have a fairly large Hispanic community here, but we also have a fairly large Pakistani population. And so we have, and then there are, all different ethnicities spread within it. So we have to be culturally responsive to all of them. So we don't want to just cater to the Hispanic community,
right?
Which we have definitely made a point of trying to not do that. Because then you have so many people who are still left out. Even if it's one student who's not getting it, that's enough to have a problem in your class. So what we always do is, what I always do at least, is I try to find as many varying topics as I can. So outside of like a novel, for instance, in my writing class, I bring in articles from like the New York Times or CNN or LA Times, and I try to bring in things from all different topics that everybody can relate to. And whenever we're talking about any theme, I always tell my students, this theme can be specific to exactly what's coming from the book or exactly what's coming from the article, or you can take it bigger, because themes can be relevant to the United States, to the world, to a different country. They don't have to be just specific to this one little area. You can take that theme as big as you want to. So if you're not finding it relevant, or you can't relate to it in the context that you're finding it in this novel or in this article, take that theme and make it more general, make it bigger, and you're going to be able to connect it to something that you have experience with.
That's great. So, yeah, I really like that. Can you give maybe a specific example? Because I think sometimes, we talk about that, those types of ideas, but like sometimes when I hear those, I love the idea, but then I'm like, well, how do I do it? Right? Can you maybe share a specific article? What does it look like?
Okay, so for instance, we read an article on. Is it appropriate? Okay, so it was an article, I think it was from last year, where it was a student from, or not a student, but a person who was from India, and they were married to an American, white American, and they were going to a traditional Indian party, and they were all supposed to be wearing Indian traditional dress. And so the husband didn't want to dress up, even though his wife wanted him to. The American husband didn't want to dress up because he felt it might be cultural appropriation. And he was, you know, felt out of place if he's wearing the Indian, traditional Indian garb, that it might be, you know, not respectful. And so the wife, of course, is saying, you know, this is our family, wear whatever you want. But so then she went out and did a bunch of research on it, and asked different people what they think. And this was around the time, I don't know if you read this on Twitter, but there was a student, I think she was in California, who wore a traditional Chinese dress to prom, because she thought it was beautiful, and it got like, some people supported her and some people had huge pushback on it, that she's taking this cultural item and just wearing it for fun. So when we talk about that, it's easy for my Pakistani and Indian students to talk about it, because it directly relates to their culture, but it's a little harder for my Hispanic students to talk about it. So I tell them, you know, it doesn't have to necessarily be clothing related. Maybe it's something with just a stereotype, or it's something related to food, or anything related to your culture that you can look at and see how somebody might take it and use it or replicate it, and in a not in a respectful way, it ends up coming across as disrespectful when they do it. So we come up with some really good ideas out of that one. And those actually, that essay, when I did that topic, was one of the best essays they had. They had so many examples that they were able to talk about.
I love that topic too, because I'm always, I am very much the husband in that situation. I'm like, would I be culturally appropriating something unintentionally, or, you know, something like that? What were their responses? Just kind of out of curiosity, because I'm always interested to know, like, as Americans and as maybe hyper aware Americans about these types of things, we get super concerned, and then I wonder, well, maybe, like, you know, when I lived overseas or when I went to different countries, like, one thing that they love to do is show you the culture, have you dress up in the clothes, have you taste, you know, like, all the foods, and be like, engage in it really, really heavily, right? And so I'm interested, like, what were your students' responses? Did they understand? I mean, I assume they had their own takes on it.
Yeah, most of them actually, most of them thought that it was okay depending on the context. That there were a couple different caveats to depend if it was okay or not. One is how you're meaning to do it. Are you trying to make fun of it? Like, is it Halloween and you're dressing up as somebody? Because then it's not okay. Right. Or are you going to, like, a wedding and you're being told to dress a certain way and you want to, and they're encouraging you to. And it also, so one was depending on how you're meaning it, and the other is the people around you and what situation you are in. So for instance, like the prom dress thing, they would say, a lot of them said is not okay, that she shouldn't have done that student, because she's not Chinese and she wasn't going to, like, a Chinese dance. It was just a regular prom. So it kind of depends on how you mean. Mostly it was how you mean it. Are you trying to be respectful or not? If you're doing it in a respectful manner, then it is okay. But if you're doing it to make fun or discriminate, then it's definitely not okay.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And Mary, so you mentioned you're using Blackboard, and you mentioned that you're maybe integrating some other apps there. So I wanted to shift a little bit to the way that you have the students publish their material or share their material. What are you asking? How are you having them share? Because I imagine this is also quite personal, right? To share something like this, and they've got to be able to feel comfortable and build rapport with the class, because I feel like they're personal issues, especially about when it deals with culture and identity.
Yeah, and they are definitely personal issues, and some of them don't necessarily want other students in the class reading it. So We post a lot on Blackboard. I don't usually have them turn in paper copies of anything anymore. It's just easier to do on Blackboard. But I also integrate in, well, Blackboard doesn't integrate this, but I have them use it. I use Flipgrid a lot so they can just talk out their ideas. And we use Google Docs a lot so that they're able to start working. And as they're working, I can go in and give them suggestions and edits through it. And mostly those are the two. Okay.
Sorry, I was going to ask, with the Flipgrid, are you watching the videos that they're sharing, or are they able to watch each other's, or do you ever have them watch each other's, or what I am just interested in?
Yeah. I do both. I have some that I just watch, and then I have some that are open to everybody. So some of the discussion things that we do are typing discussions, but some of them are just talking discussions on Flipgrid. And so then when they have one that they are supposed to watch of another student, I require them for a grade to respond back to at least one or two people and either give them suggestions or explain their opinion of it, where they have to talk for at least 30 seconds to a minute and either agree or disagree with whatever they're talking about.
And now you probably
most of them do it.
Yeah, I was going to say, you have probably lots of samples now too, curated of responses.
Yeah. All right. So then I'm able to also show them, like when we do the video at the end of the novel, I usually show them one or two sample videos, examples, just so they can get an idea. Because when you tell a student, hey, at the end of this course, you're going to be making a 5-minute video, their eyes are huge and they think there's no possible way I could ever do that.
Right.
Like, so then you show them a couple examples, and by the end, they come up with some of the best things I've ever seen. Like, I can't even believe they've done this work.
So, Mary, these like Flipgrid and Google Docs are great. Like, we talk and use them all the time. When your goal is to be like culturally responsive to people and to, to make sure that your students feel included, what role, if any, or does it make a difference one way or another, technology plays in that? Like, how does it help you to be either more culturally responsive, or is it just the method through which you use without really thinking of it in those terms?
No, I think it does help because it allows, especially with like Flipgrid or something that they're able to take home, well, even Google, that they're able to do at home on their own time and think through it. They're able to get more of their thoughts across in whatever they're talking about. And then you can go in and make whatever comments you want and keep, poking and prodding and making suggestions of where they need to keep developing areas, because sometimes when it's related to their culture, they might just like graze over it and just either assume nobody cares or that everybody already knows. So that's when you can go in and say, well, explain more on this point because not everybody knows what that means, or explain more how that's related to this theme, give more examples on it. And with Flipgrid, I mean, I respond to the Flipgrids also. I don't just leave it where it's only students happening. So I go in and I'm an active participant in the discussions, and I try to have my questions be related to the topic, but also opinion, so that they can take it wherever they need to take it or want to take it. Like, how do you feel, or how would you react, or do you know somebody, what would you do type of questions.
Yeah, that's interesting. So then you have a lot of opportunities. One thing that I also think about too is like, sometimes when you're in a classroom, depending, right, you kind of get stuck, or you're not really thinking about like the cultural issues that are at hand in front of you if you're at home, depending on your home situation. If you live with your family and you can kind of see it right in front of you, a lot of the times then with something like Flipgrid, you can actually share almost going back to show and tell, right? Like you could just say, hey, this is the actual thing. Here it is right in front of my face. And then you can have an opportunity to really talk about it and get in depth.
Yep. I had a student who, he was a good student, but he just in class would be doing other things sometimes, either other work or whatever is happening outside of class. And so you're not sure, is the student engaged? I'm not really sure if I know they can do the work, but I'm not really sure if they're trying. And then on the Flipgrid discussions, he would go, sometimes he would, because, Flipgrid cuts you off after 5 minutes. He would sometimes record 2 videos because he wanted to keep going. And he would be sharing things. He was from Colombia. And he would be sharing like videos, and he'd flip it around and show you a picture or some video that he wanted to show you to explain his point relevant to his culture. So he got really engaged on the Flipgrid, but in class he was kind of occupied doing other things.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Now, kind of stepping back a little bit, when we're talking about trying to be culturally responsive teachers, do you have thoughts on just best practices? What are some mistakes that people make when they're like first getting into this versus what are things that people should do or should consider that maybe they often don't consider when they're like trying to be more culturally responsive?
I think the first mistake is assuming that you know everything. Even in your own culture, you don't know everything, because we have to be cognizant of the culture that we are representing is only that culture. I can't speak for every single culture that's happening in the United States.
Right.
So my view is only what I've experienced. So being aware of that, as a beginning teacher over 10 years ago, somebody would ask me, what happens in the United States? And I would be like, this is the answer. My life is the answer.
I am America.
And right. In America, everybody has a life like mine. And so now I would answer, well, it's very diverse, but in my life, this is how it happens. And in other people's life, it's going to be different. So just knowing that, being aware that you don't know everything, and it's okay to admit that to students, that I don't have all the answers. You don't have all the answers. Nobody does, because we're so diverse and we want to be accepting of everybody, that there are times that the students know more than I know about things. And being able and willing to accept that, I think is a huge thing. Sometimes I say that they teach me more than I teach them as far as like cultural things go. For sure, they teach me more. I love talking about things because I'm learning on a daily basis with them. But also just not judging what they say. So I always tell my students when we're talking about issues, like any issues that we're talking about, I don't believe that there's a right or wrong answer, because I don't know that there is. Your view might be different than my view, might be different than somebody else's view because of how we've lived in the world and what we've experienced. So I'm not judging you if you're right or wrong. You can answer however you need to answer, but then you need to support yourself. So then my view is on, are you offering the support that you need to support? And are you thinking about it critically? And that's when you can go in and kind of ask the challenging questions, but give people the freedom that they need to say or do whatever they need to without judging. And sometimes it's your face. Sometimes somebody says something and you have to make sure your face doesn't cringe or make a weird question mark.
Yes. And you're right, Mary. Those are such important points to consider because, I do the same with my students, and oftentimes the majority will be students from Saudi Arabia. So I'll have, or sometimes 100% in my class are Saudi. And I start off my classes, especially when we're going to discuss topics that are connected to culture, and then culture connected to identity, and then language and things you can't really separate. and we talk about, okay, so we were all in here this class, you're all from Saudi Arabia, but some of you are from the north, some of you are from the south, some of you have different educational backgrounds, some of you have families with children, so your experience is different. And so then they sort of start to say, oh yeah, that's true, because initially they'll say, well, we're all the same, we're all from the same country, and they start with that assumption that they all have the answer for based on their own experience. Like, as you said, their experience is the answer to everything. But once I have that initial conversation with them, anything else I've noticed over time within discussions where there may be controversy or there may be a heated disagreement, that they pause and they'll say, well, I'm saying this in my experience, based on my experience. And I think that that's certainly something that we want. We want our students to be critical thinkers, and we want them to pause and before they speak, and be aware of how their experience has now added a lens through which they view the world or an issue. So I'm wondering if someone wants to start, someone wants to figure out how to network online, or where to find ideas online. I know that you mentioned, I think it was Project Lit.
Project Lit,
and that's on Twitter. And is that Project Lit the Houston? Is there an actual group, like a international group or something? What is Project Lit? It's
actually for K through 12 is what it's focused on. And every year they come out with the top, I don't know, like 20 books, young adult books that you should read based on cultural topics. But I believe that their Twitter handle is Project Lit COM, COMM, if I'm correct. But they also have, it's free. You can go to their email and sign up and ask to be part of their group. And they'll tell you yes or no, because they have different discussion groups that happen in K through 12 settings, where they'll help you come up with some questions and scenarios to talk about. And there's a large community that follows them. So if you follow them on Twitter, they are good. They have a lot of different people commenting on it, and they have a chat that happens every once in a while, where people go in and give topics and ideas of whatever they're talking about in their classroom.
And are there any specific accounts or hashtags or keywords that you recommend or that you've used in the past that our listeners could check out if they wanted to get more involved?
I've used the Project Lit one, and then just some basic, not anything big, but just some basic ones of like culturally responsive teaching and diversity, or increasing diversity. But I just tend to follow on Twitter. I tend to follow the big like ELT chat, and the ELT book club, and they cover some of these topics as well. Just they cover a wide variety of topics, so you have to kind of look at them. There used to be a chat on cultural diversity in the classroom, and it happened once or twice, and then I don't know, it might not have been popular enough, or something might have happened in the person's life who was leading it, but I haven't seen it happen since then.
Well, it sounds like Project Lit is a good place to start. So, and you gave us a lot of ideas with the books that you mentioned. That's already a great place to start.
Yeah, so there are a lot of good things to get started with here, and we'll put all of this stuff, all of the books, everything that we've talked about here in the show notes as well, so everybody can follow up and see maybe what they want to do, or if they want to pursue some of these things. And we're going to Mary, is there any things that you want to share before we shift kind of towards the wrap up here?
Just that if you're on the fence of if you want to include more cultural, social, or political, racial issues in your classroom, I say go for it. Don't be afraid. Be upfront with your students. And, you know, if you're afraid to do it because it's not your race that you're talking about, or it's not your ethnicity or your experience, don't let that be your reason not to do it, because your students it might be theirs. They might identify with it. Even if you don't think that they will, there's a pretty good chance that they will find something in it that they can connect with. So don't be afraid to do it just because you're not sure or it's not something you've experienced in your life. It's definitely worth it. And you're going to see some amazing things come out of it when you do it.
Awesome.
Great.
Okay, so now we're going to go into the fun finds. Fun finds moves off topic, and so today we got a few ideas. And Mary, this can be anything that you think is just worth sharing out. We will give our fun finds first, and then if you have one of your own, you can share it as well at the end. So Ixchell, let's start with you.
Okay.
What is your fun find?
My fun find this time is an app. What a shocker. But it is the Active Vote app. It's ACTA, ACTI, vote, like in voting, VOTE. And because we're on an election year, it's important to make decisions that are educated and that that are as educated as possible. So it's an app where you can see how you fit into the political spectrum, which candidates are the closest to you. Of course, you don't have time to research every single one, but it'll also show you when your upcoming local and state federal elections are coming up, and it'll set reminders. So it's kind of a good way to hold yourself accountable for being a responsible citizen. So
awesome.
Active Vote app.
Okay, you're such a good job on maintaining your civic duty here. So mine's a video game. I'm just talking about Zelda Breath of the Wild. It's a 2-year-old video game, but now that at the moment we are often stuck at home and told not to go outside very much and all those things. And so Zelda Breath of the Wild, again, it's a massively popular game on the Nintendo Switch. But it's great if you grew up with Zelda. It's an excellent kind of open world adventure with all sorts of cool stuff going on. And it gives me all these different ideas for like the way that they kind of have these game elements inside. Also kind of motivates me to think about like more gaming things in the classroom and breakouts and all those types of things. So Zelda Breath of the Wild is a super fun game that will suck your life away if you let it. So. Mary, what about you? What's your fun find?
Okay, mine is totally different, I guess. Mine are some books. They're called First Little Reader books. Mm-hmm. I have a 4-year-old who we are teaching to read. And with our older son, we use the Dick and Jane books. I grew up on Dick and Jane books. I know they're old. They're from like the 1950s, but that's what I grew up on. But my 4-year-old hates them. He thinks they're boring and too long. So then we tried the Bob book, which also he found super boring. So we bought these First Little Reader books that are these short stories that follow a pattern. And they're on topics that are relevant, and they're updated, and they have colored pictures, and he loves these books, and he'll sit and just read them over and over. So First Little Readers.
Awesome.
That's cool.
So thank you so much for listening to the show. If you want to get a DIESOL pin, you know how to do it. Drop a line drop a review for us in either iTunes or somewhere else, and you have a pretty high possibility of getting one of these unique DIESOL pins.
Mm-hmm. And for anything else, you can find the show notes on this episode at diesol.org.
And of course, you can find us on Twitter. You can find the show at DiesolPod, DIESOLPOD, and you can find me at Brent G. Warner.
You can find me, Ixchell, at Ixie_Pixie. That's IXY_PIXY. And we can find Dr. Mary Patton at
Dr. M. Patton, ESOL.
And that's Patton, Patton.
Patton.
And doctor is DR, right?
Yeah.
It's all these possible different ways. And M is spelled with the letter M, not EM.
Yes.
So, Mary, is that the best place for people to find you?
Yes, yeah, on Twitter at Dr. M Patton ESOL.
Excellent. Okay.
Awesome.
In German, thank you is Dankeschön. So Dankeschön for tuning in to the DIESOL podcast.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good
See
day.
you soon.